Well, you're not going to believe what's going on in children's education here in Hawaii, all the way across the country to Florida. Let's check it out.
You know, Jim, I've been thinking over the break that there's a lot of ways that people can participate, right?
Happy New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year to you. Welcome back. So there's a lot of ways people can participate, right? People can write a letter to the editor. People can show up at the state capitol and they can testify when a bill's moving through the legislature. People can call their congressman or woman. They could organize people. They can show up and they can wave signs. Sometimes, though, you actually have to sue somebody. So let's talk about how we just may have to sue the state and why we might have to do that.
Who's going to sue the state?
Well, it depends on whether there's an answer to our query.
Who's the plaintiff?
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. So I have in my hot little hands a letter that was written by attorney at law James Hochberg.
Oh, I know him. I've known him my whole life.
You know, this guy, Jim, for people that don't know and they want to check him out at jim@jameshochberglaw.com.
Well, that's my email.
That's your email. Or you could go to
my website, jameshochberglaw.com.
Yeah, because you want to check out what you do as a lawyer, right? So there are times you actually show up at places and you litigate. That's what you do, and you're a good litigator.
Of course.
So I have in my hot little hands a letter that was written by you on January 3rd. And it was sent to the Hawaii Board of Education. So all of the members of the Board of Education received this letter on behalf of little old me and Hawaii Family Forum because we are a little concerned that a policy that's in place right now does not line up with the Coach Kennedy decision that happened in June last year. So let's talk about that. Why?
Well, there's actually a bigger context.
Well,
there's
to the
there's
bigger
a much
context.
bigger context.
Well, we got to start small to draw people in, and then
I
go
like to
big.
start with the umbrella, and we'll fall down with the raindrops to the ground. So, for decades in the United States and in the Western world and outside the Western world, there has been, since Jesus' resurrection and before that, there has been spiritual warfare. So what we're really talking about is spiritual warfare. But in the United States for the past several decades, the spiritual warfare has been between will the government in the United States and in the various independent states attack or support the traditional values that Americans started this country with. And where it really shows its head is in religious liberty. And where religious liberty really explodes into news is with this libertine sex stuff, which we went from homosexuals in the 60s to gays and lesbians, and then it grew to gays, lesbians, and bi.
Well,
and then it's grown and grown and grown, and they've got this great thing where they just add a letter to the alphabet after they solve one group's problems, and they can keep fighting over getting weirder and weirder and weirder. And where we're actually heading is grooming young first, second, and third graders to become sexually active, it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. So that's the bigger context of where this letter comes from.
I can even drill that down a little further because there's always been, probably from the beginning of time, there's always been people confused about their sexuality. So like you can read some of the early things and you talk about the girly men and all that, right?
So is confused about what's happening to their body.
And before you interrupt me, let me finish my thought. I'm getting
is.
old now. You can't always cut me off because I'll forget what I'm going to say. But so there's always been people who have questioned their identity as far as we can go back into history. The difference, however, is what you're alluding to, is that now we're going from where just people are having this internal discussion inside on who they are and all that, to a society endorsing and celebrating this behavior and teaching it to where now kids that are younger are starting to experience this. When, I think we would be remiss to say that never happened before, but it is worse now. And the reason is because the government has stepped in and the government has pulled those veils aside and have let people preach it from the pulpits. And I don't mean Christian pulpits. I mean the pulpits in the classroom. So that's what we're trying to stop.
Can I speak?
No. Yes, you may speak now. I give you permission.
Thank
ding,
you, Mother.
Ding, ding, ding.
Mother Mary Ann. So what you're really saying is prior to the Ten Commandments, the national, international, cultural, religious picture included the worship of non-God with a big G, creator of the universe, God, worshiping other spirits, Ishtar, Molech, Baal. That's what you're talking about.
Right.
So in the old days, people did all kind of weird sex stuff.
They did. That's why it's in the Bible. The Bible says a man should not, lay with a woman, So, I mean, the Bible addressed it, which meant it was there. Correct. It existed.
And the reason the Ten Commandments were given is because God designed man in his image, and there's a free will aspect, but it was quite obvious, I think, because of the exercise of the free will in some parts of the world at that time, that people need to be told by God what was and wasn't okay.
You know what that sounds like to me? And we want our listeners and viewers to know that we're going to talk about this next week for Religious Freedom Week. We're going to be talking about a great speech by the great Martin Luther King, who talked about us tossing.
He's a communist. Didn't you read the paperwork?
To toss that, who what happens when we turn our back on God's moral law, right? So you want to stay tuned for that.
So it's so bizarre, and it really frustrates me to ask why we're living here in Hawaii. Is this stuff happening here in Hawaii? And the stuff that I'm talking about is why Governor Ige's Attorney General last November, which was only 2 months ago, signed an amicus brief that was filed all the way across the country in Florida, suing the state of Florida because Governor DeSantis and his legislature passed a law making it not legal to teach kids in first, second, and third grade, which I think is still 6, 7, and 8 years old, about sex stuff, gender stuff, sexuality stuff. It doesn't belong. It doesn't belong there. So they've sued. And what they sued, and the I forget how many, 20 or whatever it is, 12 attorneys general in other,
including Hawaii,
states,
we're making that very clear that Hawaii's attorney general
saying we think that it's unconstitutional because what the brief basically says, and we want to make it available to you by a link if we can do that. It's long, it's 20-something pages, but please read it because you need to understand what's going on. And what's going on is the attorney general from the state of Hawaii is telling a federal district court all the way in Florida that as far as education policy goes in Hawaii, they think it's more important to protect the letter alphabet children, however many few there might be, in school than it is to protect all the other kids from having their entire psyche injured with all this stupid sex stuff that first, second, and third, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids ought not to be even thinking about. And so if the governor in Hawaii is now, it's no longer Ige, now it's Josh Green, if his attorney general disagrees with that position, Josh Green, Governor Green, can tell his attorney general, take us out of that amicus brief. And so what I want us to do is call Governor Green's office, which is why we want to provide a link to the document. So if they tell you it's not true, you know that they're not telling you the truth. And ask them, are you supporting for Hawaii this kind of policy that you want the schools in Hawaii to tell first, second, and third, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds about sexuality stuff, about gay stuff, about who knows what's coming next? Let's ask them.
Let's get ready to rumble.
Yeah,
because I know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen already because we know that Representative Diamond Garcia, who just has been elected. So this is his first session. He's already made it clear that he's going to put a bill out there to protect parents in the public school system, right? And now you've got another side to this. We have some representatives that are very strongly, in fact, a lot of people don't know that there is a LGBT caucus in our state house now.
There is.
And so they're going to look at all these issues. So there's going to be a rumble.
And so we actually need...
Parents are in the crossfire of this, and so parents need to rise up.
That will form a Judeo-Christian caucus. That's what we need, because that's the spiritual warfare that's going on.
Can I ask you a question, Jim Hochberg, which we forgot to say who we are for the new listeners and viewers who have no idea who these two people are. No, we have to, well, I guess at some point we have to tell people who we are. Hello, people. I'm Eva Andrade. This is Jim Hochberg. Anyway, the point is, Mr. Hochberg, I have a question for you. So, how many times in our show do you think, just throw out a number, have you said, we got to pay attention to the elections on who we vote for?
How many shows have we done?
Okay, yeah. So we always...
Oh, no, you got to help me out.
I don't know. There's been hundreds.
Okay, well, that many times 4.
Okay, and because we tell everybody the reason we're doing this, the reason we're doing this show is that there is this wonderful wheel of action that starts with the elections. People get into office. You have to hold them accountable, which means telling them, yay, you did a good job on this, or hey, I don't agree with you on this one. That is our job. That is our responsibility. As Christians, we must do that. And if you're listening and you're not a Christian, it's still your responsibility. If you're a citizen in this great state, you have a job. Once they're elected, you hold them accountable. After the legislative session, elections rolls around again, it's time for you to submit that report card. How did they do?
Well, and it's kind of like that's the bare minimum.
Yes.
That's the bare minimum of citizenship. What you also can do as a citizen, once you've done that for a while and you understand it and you get it and you know the issues and you know the players, then you can start asking them to put in laws that you think are better. Mm-hmm. That's part of citizenship.
Which is why I started the show today talking about ways you get involved.
Correct.
You can write letters to the editor. You can make phone calls to your members. You can go down to the Capitol and bring omiyage. You know, for those listening that don't know what that is, it's like a gift, okay?
I thought that was a guy on the...
Oh, you're talking about the Karate
Mr. Miyagi,
Kid. Yes,
yeah.
Jim Hochberg. You crack me up. No, omiyage. It's you're bringing a gift.
That was the Irish cousin of Mr. Miyagi.
You are cracking me up, dude. All right, to all our Japanese listeners, I apologize for Jim's rude behavior. No, I know. Anyway, Jim.
I just make it up.
So the point is that we need to stay plugged in. We need to get...
This is so serious that the state attorney general in Hawaii is telling the judge in a federal district court in Florida that we in Hawaii prefer a policy that makes first, second, and third graders hear about sex stuff because there might be a minority kid in the room that otherwise would feel bad for some reason. And we're sacrificing every other kid's psyche for the rest of the kid's childhood. It's just ridiculous. And why the governor thinks that's a good idea, you need to be mad about and ask him.
Well, make sure you go to hawaiifamilyforum.org and sign up to get our alerts, because we use a system called Voter Voice, which means you can use the system to send an email to the governor if that's what you want to do. But I also recommend that you reach out to your representative or your senator. Find out how they feel about this, because like I said, there are representatives and senators that agree with that.
Correct. And you can take the document and send it to your representative or senator.
Do not do anything in a spirit of attacking anybody. Don't make threats.
To ask them, what do you think about this?
Simply find out, because this is going to, let me tell you, you have a choice in this. You can either raise your voice, or you cannot raise your voice, which means somebody else is going to make that decision for you. And if it doesn't affect you because you don't have kids, it's going to affect your nieces, your nephews, your grandkids. If you don't have nieces, nephews, and grandkids, it's going to affect your community. It's going to affect your church. It's going to affect your youth groups. It's going to affect anyone who attends a public school is going to be tapped into this. So I think that there is a time to be silent. You know, Proverbs says there's a time to sing.
Time for everything under the sun. It was a 60s hit.
So there might be a time to be silent. Right now, this is not a time to be silent, because we have an AG that has weighed in on a case in Florida, and they're basically speaking
representing on your behalf.
They wrote this letter on your behalf, and I think that we do have a right and a responsibility to let people know that this is not what we want for this state, and it's definitely not what we want for our keiki. And I think
so.
we
I want
need
to
to do
tie
that.
into the letter that I did write
Yes.
for HFF, but not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Because we still have 10 minutes or so. So what's kind of trying to make this make sense to people, because I know that I'm busy doing stuff, and so maybe we're not making sense to some people. So in the old days, my mom had a freezer that didn't automatically defrost.
Oh gosh.
It used to get full of ice, and we'd have to take everything out and
then
put
let
hot
it-
water
let it-
pots in there and let all the ice melt. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like where we are right now, that our governor would think it was perfectly fine for his attorney general to weigh in on a court case in Florida, telling them what they want the policy to be here that we don't agree with, okay? That hasn't happened overnight. That was the result of decades of political development of this theory that didn't start with kids. It started with adults who should be able to love whoever they want, okay? And over time, it has become now we want to sacrifice your kid in first, second, and third grade because maybe somebody will feel bad. So what's that got to do with a freezer? When we defrosted the freezer, I remember this. It was really kind of fun. You'd find stuff in the freezer that you hadn't seen in a really long time. And it was like frozen solid. And so we'd stick it in the sink to find out what it was. And then we throw it away. Yeah. So this has been in the back of the freezer for decades. And we can't leave it in the freezer because it's very, very harmful.
And do you ever notice that you can never find something when you're looking for it? And then later on, when you don't need it, you come across it and it's right in a place that you should have seen it.
So I have the inverse experience. I never throw anything away because as soon as I throw it away in 4 days, I need it.
No, but I think most people will agree with you. That's Murphy's Law. I think that totally happens. But I know that in regards to what our responsibility is, there are a lot of times, and I think your freezer analogy is a good one, because a lot of us have no idea what's happening I mean, you and I do this.
We know. That's why I was thinking, how can I make it make sense to somebody that doesn't really follow me?
But we don't know everything, right? Yeah. How many 3,000 plus bills move through the Capitol in a 2-year process, and only a handful, like around 300 or so, actually become law. So there's a lot of movement and a lot of things. And you've seen cases now, they've changed it because of a court case, but they used to be able to take a bill all the way up to the last day, gut it, and then make it a whole new bill that meant nothing.
That nobody heard.
That nobody heard of. So, but I think that what we need to do, and you've heard me say this at meetings that we've gone to, before you can take the future, and we're going to talk about this with Martin Luther King next week, before you go forward, sometimes you got to go back. Yeah. You got to pay attention to next week and find out.
I don't think he's going to smell very good.
We'll see. Jim,
yes.
Jim, do not make me get off track. When you make me, then I lose my, and I was about to say something really powerful. Okay, well, the point is that we have to sometimes know what we're dealing with right now before we can go forward in the future. And you and I know we've had this conversation with people, right? They go, well, why don't we do a bill like they have in Florida? Well, first of all, because Florida is a red state and we're a blue state. And even Diamond Garcia, when he said he was going to introduce this bill, he said in his interview, it's probably not going to get heard, but I just want to open up the conversation. Well,
and for people who don't know, if a bill doesn't get heard, it doesn't get a hearing, and it can't become law if it doesn't get heard in both houses.
And there really is no conversation. I mean, I really thought about that. I think that what he's doing is a good thing because he's bringing it to people's awareness.
He's having a conversation in the news, so there is one.
Well, no, a conversation means you say something, I say something, and we actually get into it. No. What happens in this state is you tell me your opinion, and I'll tell you why you're wrong, and then my opinion wins. I mean, that's how it works in Hawaii politics. So I don't believe that it's going to open up a conversation, but I do think that it will open up, it'll educate people that this is what's happening. And through that education, conversations will take place. So I don't want people to be disappointed.
You can't get tired and quit. You got to do the long haul.
Remember that we're in a marathon.
Yeah.
Right? We're not in a sprint.
So let's talk about the letter.
Yes.
And the reason that it's really important, and the reason it's directly tied to the brief that our Attorney General submitted in Florida is what I started talking about at the beginning of the show. Spiritual warfare is what's behind all of this. And the warfare is between the spirits of the alphabet libertine lifestyles, the LGBTQ, LMNOP plus minus divided by, and Judeo-Christian values that come out of Scripture. That's what's in dispute. And where we know from the AG's brief, the Department of Education is taking the wrong side on that fight in the schools. They want the letter alphabet arguments to win over the opposition. And if you think about it, who's opposed to libertine sex stuff? People of the book, which would be Muslims, Jews, and Christians, basically. Mm-hmm. Okay? And it's because we have a worldview that is biblical. So when the Supreme Court of the United States in June of 2022 issued its Kennedy decision out of the state of Washington that said Judge Kennedy was wrongly fired as a football coach at a public school in the state of Washington because he wanted to pray by himself at 50-yard line after his team game.
How dare you pray silently at the sidelines where I can see you?
What the Supreme Court said was, look, all of the prior judicial gymnastics over prayer in school and freedom of religion in public school, we're going to answer it right now, and this is the rule. And the rule is Coach Kennedy, all the other employees of his school across the entire country, all the public school employees, including in Hawaii, of every public school have the same right in their private time where other school employees have the right to do other things. They completely have the right to do religious things as long as they're not compelling students. Yep. So because of that opinion, Eva and I looked at the Board of Education policy in the state of Hawaii on religion in the schools. And it basically says some good stuff, but then it has some old-fashioned language that conflicts with the Kennedy.
When you read it, and you just read it with an open mind, it looks like it was starting in the right way.
Correct.
It was going in the right direction, correct, and then suddenly they take a hard left. It's very odd.
Well,
it's very odd.
When you put it in the context of the Attorney General of the state of Hawaii telling the federal judge in Florida that his office, which represents the Department of Education, intends to enforce the alphabet rights over opposition to alphabet rights, that's why it's an issue.
No,
we wrote a letter.
You did.
And we said, look, you've got until January 13th, which is coming right up, to tell us whether or not you're going to change this policy to be compliant with the Kennedy Supreme Court decision. And we happen to know that there are employees of the public school system in this state whose religious liberty rights have been infringed. And I have been working with the First Liberty Institute in Texas, who did the Coach Kennedy case. We have found a law firm here that is willing to sue over them not changing that policy, which, by the way, is Board of Education Policy 900-3, if you want to look at it. Because we need to take back the way our government is dealing with our rights.
And that's a point I want to make, right? So, is it that we might have to sue the Hawaii State Department of Education? I was going to say we're the proverbial we. It's we. It's
you
not
don't
like
have a claim.
Yeah, Hawaii Family Forum does. However, the reason that Hawaii Family Forum agreed to let you write this letter on our behalf is because we want to give them the opportunity to work with them. To fix it, right?
Yeah.
So we don't believe that you always have to go to the sue, sue somebody.
They
you
could
want
very
to give them
easily fix it.
Yeah, I mean,
administratively.
this doesn't have to become a battle, and
our letter doesn't say fix it by January 13th.
No, it just says respond.
If you're going to or not.
The letter, you and I have worked together a long time, and you're definitely a black and white, in your face, this is how we got to do it kind of person. And I'm more like, oh, let's talk about it, feelings, yada, yada, right? So, and I was actually okay with the letter. I think the letter was very straightforward. It was, we're giving you into the 13th to just let us know, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. And then you attached to this letter this thing done by First Liberty to kind of explain, right? To explain them. And I really like how they word in here. They say that according to longstanding precedent, teachers and other school employees do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. And I love that. But I want to be clear, because not everybody's going to like this, but this is true. This means that if that teacher is a Muslim, they have every right as well.
Sure. In fact, do you know the case that created that legal point? It was Barnett in the 60s. During the Vietnam War, teachers were protesting the Vietnam War, and they wore black armbands. And they got disciplined, and they sued, and the Supreme Court said you don't shed your First Amendment right at the schoolhouse door.
And I love that. Okay, I love that. And we're seeing this. I mean, what's happening in New York, right? We've got the Satanic Church trying to do their own thing
in the school, and
it makes us mad. And of course, we want everybody to know the truth of Jesus. That's what we do. We live and breathe this stuff. But freedom, religious freedom is religious freedom, and we need to be clear about that.
And so there's one major thing that gets left out of the conversation that I want to make sure we put in, and that I want you to write down, and that is one of the biggest, most effective tools that you have for religious liberty in the public schools in the state of Hawaii and in most other states is you have the right to take your public school child out of school under the release time provision to go somewhere else to get religious education. So if you know about any good news clubs, or I forget what those groups are, Kahu Kekuna, I met him decades ago. He was at Kamehameha Schools in charge of whatever that group is. Release time, religious education is necessary. You need to make arrangements for your child while they're having other elective, art classes, sports classes, whatever. They have the right to get religious education that you pick, because the schools are pushing what the AG is pushing. You need to protect your kid in the environment of school, and the release time is the way to go.
Yep, and we're going to be talking more about religious freedom next week. So you want to stay tuned, and you want to make sure that you click that like, share, subscribe, because this year we're going hot and fast. Jim and I are going to be dealing with things you're not going to hear anywhere else. Jim and I are going to have open and honest discussions. We want you to participate. Comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Make sure that that's what you're doing. Stay tuned. Things are going to get better. Things are going to get quick. So next week, religious freedom. Find out what Martin Luther King might have to say about some of these craziness we're experiencing today. Mahalo for sharing today with us.
Aloha.